They've done the Great Loop, gunk-holing the East Coast in the Bahamas. It's a boat we don't talk about very often, of a very interesting design that you can build at home out of conventional lumber with very little in the way of boat building skills. A boat that will hold a ton of weight but still float in just inches of water. This week, I'd like to introduce you to the Sharpie. Sharpies are a type of hard-chined sailboat with a flat bottom, which means the bottom and sides come to a near 90-degree angle. They have an extremely shallow draft, which means you can usually beach them or sail them into just inches of water, like a John boat, but with sails. They have keels, but not the typical keel in the middle of the boat where you'd expect to find it. They're believed to have originated in New Haven, Connecticut, or around that region of Long Island Sound. They were traditional fishing boats used for oystering and later appeared in other areas. Instead of a conventional centerboard in the middle of the boat that swung up into a locker, the keel on these is usually called a leeboard and bolted to a pivot on the side of the hull. This is what makes them so easy to build. The hull itself doesn't need a hole in it to accommodate the keel locker. The pivot bolt is not underwater, so it can't leak. The hull is just flat. A good piece of laminated plywood will do the trick. Sharpies first became popular in New Haven, Connecticut toward the end of the 19th century. They came into use as the successor of the dugout log canoe and most likely were derived from the Flatiron skiff. In an 1879 edition of Forest and Steam, a man named James Goodsell of the Fairhaven neighborhood claimed to have built the first Sharpie with his brother in 1848. His claim was never contested. Building Sharpies was a spin-off business from oystering and continued to grow, meeting not only local needs but were sold to other oystermen along the eastern seaboard. The names of Rowe, Graves, and Thatcher became well known as Sharpie builders by the 1880s. Sharpies were typically used for oyster tonging and evolved to suit that kind of work. They grew in popularity because they were so easy to row, they were cheap to build, and they were very fast under sail. They started using them for racing. The sailing speed was said to easily exceed 10 knots because of the low drag flat bottom on these boats. By the 1880s, nearly 200 Sharpies were to be found along the wharfs of Fairhaven alone. In modern times, Scott from Scott's Boat Pages says it best on his site. Many of these designs are so appealing and so simple and inexpensive to build that if my needs for a boat were simply to cruise the local waters of the Gulf Coast and the Florida Keys, I'd be building one today. The only limitation of the Sharpie type is in long blue water passages, as they must be quite large to be safe for that kind of sailing. But according to those who've done it, even a large Sharpie can be built in a fraction of the time for much less money than any other wooden boat of the same size. The reason for this is the design. Sharpies were developed in the mid-19th century as a no-nonsense working vessel built by the end user, who didn't have the refined boat building skills or the time to build a complex round-bottom hull. The Sharpie as a type is characterized by its flat bottom, and it's that flat bottom that allows that extremely shallow draft and great load carrying ability, not to mention easy construction out of common building materials. This made them perfect for the needs of the East Coast Oyster industry before sails were replaced with the internal combustion engine. Sharpies also proved to be fast and handy under sail, making them even better suited for their tasks as workboats, and also leading to their adaptation as cruising and racing yachts. The type was made famous in time by designers like Howard L. Chappell, and examples such as Commodore Ralph Monroe's Egret, a 28-foot double-ender, designed specifically for the shallow inlets of South Florida and the rough Gulf Stream. At first glance, one would think the flat bottom hull would be totally unsuitable for rougher water, and it's true that pounding can occur, especially motoring on modern Sharpies. But under press of sail, when the hull is heeled well over, the hard chine between the hull bottom and topsides presents a nice V shape to the waves. This hard chine aids in preventing leeward motion, and most designs have retractable centerboards or lee boards for better windward performance where the water is deep enough. The only real limitation for offshore use is the fact that most designs are not self-righting like deep-keeled monohulls, due to having higher center of gravity with their ballast inside the hull. This is the trade-off for that shallow draft, but most coastal and short-distance island hopping where weather windows can be a take advantage of is not an issue. And to talk about the Sharpie, we have to talk about the Leeboard design. Instead of a keel in the middle that swings up into a locker, which is harder to build, we bolt the keel to the side of the boat, or both sides of the boat. I found this Leeboard Sharpie for sale back in 2020 that you can see while I explain Leeboards. A leeboard is a form of pivoting keel used by a sailboat largely and very often in lieu of a fixed keel. Typically mounted in pairs on each side of the hull, leeboards function much like a centerboard, allowing shallow draft craft to ply waters fixed keel boats can't go. Only the leeward side leeboard is used at any time, as it submerges when the boat heels under the force of the wind. A disadvantage is that they typically bear very little ballast, which means the boat will heel over a lot. Leeboards existed in China from at least the 8th century on warships, and it said held the ships so that they were even when the wind and waves arose in fury. They were neither driven sideways nor overturned. Leeboards for stabilizing junks and improving their capability to sail upwind are documented from a book by Li Chuan. The innovation was transmitted to Portuguese and Dutch ships around 1570. The Portuguese experimented with caulking their vessels in the Chinese manner, and the Dutch probably added leeboards to their craft that were copied from Chinese models. Leeboards have been used by relatively large inshore and coastal sailing vessels used for transport since 1570, such as Dutch barges, Thames barges, and American gondolas. For those boats, leeboards provided the advantage of shallow draft for working close inshore and unobstructed hold for all the cargo. In particular, they allowed gondolas to take the hard-to-load and unload cargo in unimproved tidal areas, as well as readily conduct maintenance on the hulls. You could beach them. Leeboards were also easier to build than large centerboards would have been. Leeboards are no longer common in commercially built boats because many people consider them inelegant and awkward. They're far more common in home-built boats, especially the puddle duck racer and stitch and glue type sailboats. Leeboards simplify construction of the hull, and they're attached to the outside and don't require holes in the hull, which can leak. Since centerboards are retractable, they require a large watertight trunk to hold them in place when they're retracted, and this occupies what otherwise might be useful space in the cabin or cockpit of the boat. Use of leeboards, while it adds complexity to the process of tacking, leaves the floor of the boat unobstructed. According to traditional design principles, a boat utilizing a leeboard either needs to have 2 retractable leeboards, one on each side, or a method of removing the leeboard and attaching it to the other side while underway, because nearly all sailboats tack their way upwind, with the exception of the proa. However, some small sailboat designers claim to have created seaworthy vessels with only a single fixed leeboard. On a traditional 2-leeboard or non-fixed leeboard design, the boats are designed so that the windward board can be retracted to reduce drag. Unlike centerboards, which are symmetrical along the boat's axis, leeboards are often asymmetric so that they're more efficient at providing lift in one direction. I found Sharpie plans all over the internet. Here's one from Duckworks for $40. If you're a boat builder and want a very cool little project, I think this would be a lot of fun. If you're just a sailor like me, I think the Sharpie is a very interesting design. And if you wanted to build your own boat and get into super shallow waters around Florida or the Bahamas, this might be right up your alley. Don't forget to hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. I'll see you guys next time.